Hello guys, I am going to do a tutorial on how to make leaves and grass in colored pencil today. So I already have my pencil lines down and I'll just show you how I start to shade them in. What I'm going to do first is do the grass because that's a little quicker than the leaves. Now how you start is actually doing a little motion like this and just sort of doing almost like you would do fur in a way. And you start with indigo blue, which is one of the more important colors in colored pencil. And you just do rows of it. And if you're going up to a foreground, you can actually start making the blades a little longer. And what you can do is actually draw the larger blades up front and just lightly outline them. And then just sort of fill them in from there and get thinner and thinner as you move back. That way they sort of blend into the background as you're working. Okay, so that's your basic start with the indigo blue. And then where you'll go is you'll actually start with a dark green and start shading toward the bottom of it. You can go over a little bit of the indigo blue as well. I mean, it's pretty much just filling in that color. And just maybe add a stem or two, not a stem, but like a central vein in one or two of the front blades if you want to add a little bit more realism there. And then we'll use a secondary color, which is a lighter green, just lighter than the dark green that we were previously using. And you'll go over that a little. And when you have leaves or blades of grass, the way that they are kind of separated by that single stem, you can actually do one side in one color and the other side in a lighter color. A lot of foliage sort of follows that as a general rule. With the veining, you'll see the light kind of play on those shapes. And then you're going to go in here and you're going to use this to stretch out just beyond the darker colors. And this will be like where the sun hits the blades and makes them really bright green. And then take a second bright green color, second lightest, and just slightly go over that a little bit more. Also, just depends on how much sunlight you have in your image or how much you want to have reflecting, how light you can go, because you can go all the way into the yellows for grass if you really want to show sun shining on it and whatnot. But this is just a general show of how colors work to make this effect. and I'm just using the basics for right now. And after this tutorial is done, I will include a few pictures that I've done where I've used this effect, just so you can see an example of how it works into a picture and how it can be done. Make sure to have very sharp pencils too. I sharpened them before I started this just because I want to make sure everything is good. And then you can go in maybe toward the forward blades of grass, the ones in the foreground that are larger. You can add more light colors to them. They might even have a little bit of brown on them, as a lot of plants do. They have little parts of them that's sort of brown. And I would use like a lighter brown with some of this. And then maybe go over it with a little bit of a lighter color to smooth it out. And then, speaking of brown, you take a dark brown at the end, and you'll sort of add it very little, not too dark, toward the bottoms of your blades of grass, just because it adds a little more depth, because they grow in chunks, and you're kind of doing this in rows, the way that this technique is kind of structured. And it adds a little more where you can see how the grass is growing and the rows of blades kind of line up with each other. But that is the grass, and that's how I learned how to do it. And that's grass, if you want to make it look realistic. Now we'll move on to leaves. And again, we start with indigo blue. And these are just some simple leaves. I didn't want to do anything too complicated. I was going to do hibiscus leaves, but they took a little bit too much time for me to really get in all the detail I wanted on them. And for the purpose of a tutorial, I need it to be fairly quick and accurate and not too complicated. Just, you know, as an intro for people who are getting into colored pencil. I don't want to overwhelm people. But this is simple enough. You go in your your leaves, you outline them a little bit, not too dark. I'm just getting it done just because I want them to be able to show up on the camera. But you go in with your veins and add a very light amount of shading on the veins, because when you look at leaves, they'll actually have indents in the leaf, and the light will kind of play on that. So just keep that in mind. And this is a cluster of leaves growing out from a stem that I chose to do, because you get all kinds of fun little twists and turns in here, and you also get some nice shadows in here to kind of show you how everything sets up with the leaves and how they grow and the way that they kind of frame each other. You can even use references of your own house plants for this. I mean, it's great to work from life, so I definitely recommend that. I've taken leaves from outside and kind of kept them in paper bags just to kind of get this, you know, more accurate as I can. And another thing too to keep in mind is different leaves sometimes have a lot of glossiness on them. And that's another kind of interesting things with foliage. They all have different consistencies. Some of them are furry, some of them are really shiny, and some of them are just, you know, regular leaves where they have sort of a porous look to them, look and feel. But that's just the basics of them. I mean, they're just like scales. There are tons and tons of different types. And we'll go over with some green. And leave a little bit of negative space for your highlights, because there is some yellow and a lot of green leaves. You'll actually notice, especially when the sun hits them, you can actually see a lot of yellow in them. And one thing I've noticed too, I have vines around my apartment, and I don't know if this applies for all plants, but I've noticed a lot of plants, when they're growing up, the very tiniest shoots that are coming out are actually a little bit red or pinkish, and that's really an interesting touch that nature has with plants. And I've noticed it on a few other plants. I'm not sure how many of them do that, but it's something interesting to take note of. And again, you're going to follow the same sort of patterning of shading inside the veins and leaving negative space towards the edges for your highlights. Now we go in with a little brighter of a yellow, so these will be almost like a lime green color leaves. And you don't need to use a whole bunch of colors. You only need like 3 or 4 different colors to actually shade something like a leaf or a flower. And there are projects where you can use upwards of 10 pencils for something that you're doing. Not necessarily one object, but sometimes it does take that. Colors are very complicated at times. Depends on all. It all depends on what kind of thing you're doing and how many colors it has in it. The main thing is to savor your pencils. And a trick here, if you don't want to overdo something and you kind of don't want to go back and, you know, press real hard into any shadows, you can actually fool around with a let's see, a nice complementary color, which is nice lilac color, or even orange, but I'm just going to use lilac for right now, because it actually does something interesting. It does add depth, and it also adds some interesting color to it. You can do this with orange as well when you're talking about greens. I'll have to do a video on complementary colors. I plan to. I'm just adding little tips and tricks where I can right now. But you can see how it does darken up some of the shadowing and the veining, and that's useful without having to go back and darken up with one color rather than, you know, adding something that makes your image pop a little bit. And that is a simple version of leaves. And if you wanted to add just one more color, just for fun, as a bright yellow, and just kind of outline within the lines of your already drawn leaf. Okay, and that's it. I'm going to add some images of artwork that I've done before that I've used these techniques on, and I will attach them to the end of this video. Thank you for watching.